open this up, the September 27th meeting. And first item on the agenda is agenda changes. Does anyone have any changes?
I just have something at the end that I forgot from last time.
Okay,
Okay.
I'll remind you.
Because it was 10 o'clock last time.
I know, it's hard to remember. And second item is public comments for non-agenda items. And judging by our audience, it looks like there are no public comments. So third agenda item is returning to the zoning and subdivision revisions, our housekeeping changes, and someone's gonna have to remind me where we are. We'd gotten pretty close,
We finished the
hadn't
zoning
we?
regulations.
The
So,
zoning, so
yeah,
we just, did we?
We're just ready to start on the subdivision regulation
Okay.
changes.
That's why it went till 10 o'clock, because,
Because everybody
Wanted
wanted
to
to get the
finish,
end,
yeah.
yes.
There was a discussion about what clear headroom was, and you suggested Rolf and I do some research about what that is, and I did.
Oh, you already did, all right.
Yeah, so I
Let's
can
find out.
report on that. The International Building Code is what the state of Vermont builds their code on. They make revisions to certain sections, but they build it on that. And it's adopted the 2015 version, and there have been some adjustments since then. But what it says is minimum ceiling height, and this is in buildings that contain 2 dwelling units or more, such as apartment buildings. So it doesn't apply to single family or duplex, but it's 7 foot 6 inches in hallways, common areas, and habitable rooms. And then they're pretty good about defining what a habitable room is. It makes sense what it is. I think we all know that. So 7 foot 6 for commercial buildings, more than 2 dwelling units. I couldn't find anything in the IBC, but there's something called the International Residential Code, which is very similar and built on the same basis and developed by the same groups of people. And this one says for all habitable rooms must have a ceiling height of 7 feet, which is what Rolf was suggesting last meeting. Habitable rooms include bedrooms, living spaces, and kitchens, but exclude bathrooms, hallways, utility spaces, and closets. Now again, not hallways that are joining multiple apartments and it's an exit way. That falls under the IBC because it's more than 2 units in a building. It also said the ceiling with exposed beam spaces at least 4 feet apart can measure 6 foot 6 inches at the bottom of those cross ties. If you're familiar with a typical post and beam house, there's rafters here and then there's usually a tie beam that goes between those rafters to keep them from spreading out. And if those rafters are 4 feet, at least 4 feet apart, then you can come down to 6 foot 6. And then finally, it says slope ceilings, the minimum ceiling heights in rooms with slope ceilings, such as a finished attic space, is 7 feet over at least 50% of the room area. Room area in this case is calculated as the total floor space with walls at least 5 feet high. Areas with ceilings lower than 5 feet are allowed, but do not count toward the official room area total. So that's what I found out. And Alex, I have this on my computer. I have not yet sent it to you, but I can if you'd like.
That would be helpful, yeah. Our hope to refresh your memories on this, our hope in making the suggested housekeeping change was to simplify the definition of living space for attics so that it wasn't so much a 2-part test of various heights, clear space and ceiling height and all of that. And it was just a simple, like, if it's above this many feet, it counts, and if it's below, it doesn't. So it sounds like there's a little bit of both in what you just read, and maybe I can co-opt
Yeah,
some
for
of
one,
that.
it says everything that's 5 foot or more from the floor to the underside of the slope ceiling counts as habitable space.
Right.
Period. Just, there's habitable space. If you have that, you can then come down to 7 feet over at least 50% of that space. You can't have less than 50%. You have to have at least 50% of that habitable room 7 foot high.
Right, so the way we've been using this is not to tell people what they can and can't build their attics to look like, but to tell them when
It'll
it counts
say whether-
towards their
exactly.
their fee, when we
Right.
calculate their building permit. So if they say, hey, I want to finish my attic, do I owe you money? We say, well, if it meets these criteria, it counts
Right.
as living area, and you have to get a
Right.
permit for that.
Right. And if we adopted something like this, that
Yeah.
would be the definition of habitable
Right.
space, and it would be clear to everybody.
As long, but like you also read the piece about the ties and 4 feet
Yeah,
separation,
yeah,
6
there
and a
are
half
some
feet. That
variations.
makes it more complicated maybe than it
Yeah,
needs to be.
depending on how you build your building.
Right. So yes, and again, our hope in the housekeeping change is just to simplify it. So send me that, and I'll
Okay.
work something up so you can take a look at it in the next go around. Thank you, John.
Great.
Yep,
I'm going to make a note that you're going to email me that.
yep, I will.
Weren't we discussing retaining walls too? It was-
Yeah, we decided that we would talk about that at a later date.
Right. In the next draft, I believe. We have a variety of things that you wanted to see again before we went to public hearing, I think. So I need to do another pass at this, and then maybe we can get there. But we still do need to go through the subdivision changes.
All right.
And we have a summary document that we've been working from, dated July 24th, 2017. And we have gotten through 6 of the 7 pages. So in the middle of page 6, we start with the subdivision regs. And the first one, I will look at the Word document, make sure there isn't anything else sneaking in before the first one, but the first one should be section 2.1 regarding boundary line adjustments. Yes, that is the first one. Okay, so, as I explained, if you have your subdivision document in front of you, I can put it up on screen, but I won't if everybody's got the subdivision housekeeping document. There's extras up here if you'd like a hard copy. So what's proposed here is that this whole section gets revised to collapse what are 2 very similar land transfer options into one broader category. So I'm just reading off the summary here. It eliminates the awkward and perfunctory DRB review of larger land transfers in favor of simple administrative review. And it eliminates the requirement that future DRB review is needed if there's ever development on the transferred land. So right now, if somebody and their neighbor would like to swap some land, it can be done in one of 2 ways. It can be a simple boundary line adjustment, but if the amount of land being transferred is large, it can't be done as a simple boundary line adjustment. It has to be done as what's called a transfer of land to a joiner. So for very small pieces, boundary line adjustments are approved by the zoning administrator. The development review board doesn't play any role in that. You get a zoning permit, you file the deed, zoning administrator looks at the deed, makes sure it complies with the permit, and you're done. For larger transfers, the way the regs read now is you have to go to the DRB first. It's very odd. They don't actually render a decision. They simply review it to determine whether there's subdivision happening. So it's basically are you trying to pull one over on us? Is this really a subdivision? You're transferring so much land? If the DRB says, no, it's not a subdivision, then again, it goes back to the zoning administrator. A permit has to be issued, same protocol as the boundary line adjustment. There's just a check at the board level if it's a large amount of land.
What's the break point?
Yeah, good question. I believe it depends on the district, and it's the minimum lot size for the district. So in the ag zone where you live, because rural zoning dropped the minimum lot size to a half an acre, it's anything over a half an acre has to go through the transfer of land process.
Okay.
In the RR1 district, which is the middle slice of Hinesburg, where the minimum lot size is 3 acres, it would be anything over 3 acres would have to go in front of the DRB before going back to the zoning administrator. So the reason this change was proposed is that most of the time these go to the DRB and the DRB says, fine, like what, it's obvious it's not a subdivision and the staff is smart enough to know that. And so approved, go get your zoning permit. It seems like an unnecessary step in the review process. I also don't, it doesn't seem like the two need to be distinguished from each other. It seems like they're both boundary line adjustments. One is just more land than the other, but there are no new lots being created and it doesn't seem like it's any different in my mind.
What happens if somebody gets land from a neighbor, so now they can do 3 lots instead of 2?
Right,
That's fine.
that's fine.
Yeah,
Just
we
happens.
don't, that neighbor would then come in, or they would come in for subdivision review at a later date, and they'd have more land to work with, and that's A-okay. The only thing that complicates this, which we're not proposing any changes to, is when one of the 2 lots in question is part of a previously approved subdivision, and there's a plat on file that shows that lot. If that's the case, then, there's no simple administrative process, because the boundary line adjustment is going to change an approved recorded plat, and by state statute, there has to be a public hearing, and so those are all considered subdivision revisions in our practice and in these regs, and so they go through a subdivision review. We're not proposing to change that, because I would like to change that, but the statute doesn't really allow us to.
Does that happen?
Oh, all the
Yeah.
time, yeah. Yeah, enough lots have been subdivided in Hinesburg that it's common that two neighbors will want to do a very simple boundary line adjustment, and we'll have to tell them, sorry, but you're gonna have to go in front of the DRB, which isn't that big of a deal, but it's just an extra step. The more important thing is that they're gonna have to amend a previously recorded survey, so they're gonna have to get a surveyor involved. There's more cost that way. So the other.
This is when that land's, I'm sorry, I interrupted, but this is when that land is part of a larger
Approved
subdivision.
subdivision,
that
yep.
Got approved. If it was a standing lot from the beginning,
Then
doesn't
you,
count.
right,
You can
then
trade
these,
with your neighbor,
then
whatever
these,
deal you
these
make.
boundary line adjustments that can be approved administratively are easy and can be done.
Okay,
So anyways, the basic proposal is to collapse these 2 different kinds of transfers into one, get the DRB out of the business of looking at them, and keep them just administrative approvals. And then, furthermore, eliminate this provision in the transfer of land portion of what we currently have that says, once you transfer that land to your neighbor, if you ever want to put anything on it, you have to come back to the DRB for review. And, it's an awkward review because there's not really a good pathway to do it. You're not doing a subdivision, you just maybe decided to put a barn or a garage on part of the land that you just got from your neighbor. So under this proposal, we would eliminate that, and you could transfer land to your neighbor, and your neighbor could then use it for whatever the zoning would normally allow for with the current setbacks and all the rest.
just as if he'd always had that.
Exactly. It never made sense to me
Why?
because the neighbor who was sending the land could have done whatever they wanted with it. So why do we make the neighbor who's receiving the land jump through extra review hoops if it's the same land,
I mean,
Anyway,
if he wants to put a building 2 inches off the lot line, then he can't do that.
right, because of the
you know,
setback
Because of
requirements.
the setback requirements. So all of the stuff that's in place already applies.
Right, it applies to the land before the transfer, it will apply to the land after the transfer. Why we require that additional DRB review, I just don't think it's necessary. I don't think it gains us anything.
So will you call it boundary adjustments and no longer
Yeah.
transfer of land to an
Yep.
adjoiner?
That's what's
I prefer
proposed, is
those-
just
that
to get
wording.
rid of the wording of transfer of land, which
Right.
confuses people. Everyone calls them
Yes.
boundary line adjustments.
I
And just
agree.
call them what they are and let the
Yeah.
zoning administrator continue to approve them.
Mm-hmm.
Here's one that Marie will speak to, though. And you'll see it's in big bold note in the summary. Right now, when you do a boundary line adjustment or a transfer of land of, larger property, no survey is required. So it's quick, it's easy, it's a zoning permit, you file some deeds, you're done. The X thousands of dollars for a surveyor don't come in. The longtime town assessor, who's now one of us on the planning commission, and I think our former zoning administrator, I don't know about our current one, maybe Mitch too, would love it if if a survey was required for any monkeying around with property lines, because then it's very clear how much land is being transferred, who's getting what, and there's a record of it in the in the town in the town office. So Marie can speak to that. All I'm going to say is there are pros and cons. There's definitely a pro in terms of having a record, having something that's clear. There's definitely a con in that oftentimes people doing these boundary line adjustments are doing them for simple reasons that don't involve a lot of money transfer, or they don't have a lot of money to make the process happen. Maybe they have a few $100 to pay an attorney to write a deed. They may not have $1,000 or $3,000 to have a surveyor come and do a survey of what's being transferred. So there's pros and cons to having a survey required. But Marie, it's all yours.
So part of my job in my office is to prepare all the transfers that happen for the tax mapper each year. And it's a nightmare to deal with when they haven't had, it's not, I call it a nightmare, it's my word, I guess, when they haven't had a survey, because we just don't know. They'll say what it is, but we just don't know.
Normally, what you provide the tax mapper once a year to update our parcel map is our surveys. So the tax mapper comes downstairs to the clerk's office and pulls all of the recorded surveys for new subdivisions and then draws in, the new lines. And for these, the tax mapper gets a zoning permit referencing a deed, and then the tax mapper has to read a written description of what happened and try to pen that in on a tax map showing parcel lines.
And-
So it's harder.
And people, it's my impression that people think that tax maps are more than what they are. They're really just a tool for us to work by. They aren't set in stone, even though people, and so that if they do this and they don't have a survey, they still want it to show on the tax map. They're the first ones to come right in and say, if I haven't done it that year, maybe I, for some reason, didn't do it. They want it on there. And so I think it's a false sense of security that they have. And that is a second thing that, yeah, sure, they maybe don't have the money, but then sometimes they're worse off down the road. And I'm thinking of the issue on North Road of all these lots that were created years ago, and there were no surveys, and they wrote their own deeds somewhat. And now they're very upset that we can't help them. And we can't, because the stuff that they wrote is garbledy-goop.
So, would it make a difference, I'm inclined to favor the survey, but it says, actually in the regulations currently, a simple sketch or a survey of the parcel being conveyed is sort of a requirement. That's a big difference.
A big difference in the sketch is the nightmare.
Yeah. What about, how would you feel about a simple sketch to an identified scale or a survey of the parcel being conveyed? Do you think that helps that situation, or do you think it's not sufficient? Yeah.
We're very big on surveys.
So now, also, the survey business, it's interesting, like, we just had a parcel that we subdivided off of our property surveyed, and, it wasn't $3,000.
No.
Are you willing to share how much your
Yeah.
surveyor charged you?
I
You don't
haven't
have to,
seen the
Ralph.
final bill. It's something like $1,400,
Right.
and and
It
it's a
could be
fairly, all the pins are placed and all
Yeah.
that sort of stuff. So, I don't think the survey under uncomplicated circumstances is something that's that difficult to produce.
Right.
Okay.
But remember, when you have two landowners who are in dispute over a little piece of land and their solution is, maybe their two attorneys says, your solution is just do a simple boundary line adjustment. The moment you throw a $1,000 bill into that equation, it all just, sometimes it just goes away, because not everyone has the resources to drop $1,000.
Yeah.
To settle what is a 10-foot, property dispute. And that's what a lot of our boundary line adjustments are is, I need some land over here, how about you give me some land on the other side and we'll just do,
Yeah.
offsetting boundary line adjustments,
But
or,
that's not a dispute.
or,
said
or you
if
have a
there's
dispute. Yeah, we have
why don't
those as
both-
well.
Why don't both parties pay for a survey that
Good
settles
idea.
the issue?
Sure, I mean, and
Well,
that
I
sounds,
don't know whether we can require that.
it sounds
but I
great,
mean,
but it's
so
just a
500
lot of,
apiece.
it's a lot of money for a lot of folks in this community.
True. And I don't disagree with that, Alex, but
yeah,
I
don't-
just think
don't
it can come back to haunt them down the road. I mean, they think it's settled, but it probably maybe isn't if they
Yeah.
don't have a survey. I'm really big on
What do
surveys.
you get from people who don't do a survey? A verbal description? Do you get a sketch
I-
at any time that's got some dimensions
Some-
written on it?
I
not
don't
to
remember seeing
scale,
any
but-
sketches. I just
I know
have
that
written.
some have sketches because I've done a
Peter's help.
couple.
Yeah, I was
for-
gonna
for
say
people,
staff.
Ben Hunt in particular up
Yeah.
on McGee Hill Road. A couple of my GIS maps ended up in the land records
Yeah.
along with the deed
As
description.
if they were accurate surveys?
Well,
or-
they have all the provisos about not
Caveats
being a
about-
survey,
yeah.
but no, I think most of the time it's a written description, just the
Right.
way the old fashioned deeds for most
Right.
of your lots that haven't
Yeah.
been surveyed are described as, 200 feet along this line, to the old oak tree, turning south, that sort of thing.
That's what you get?
Yeah,
Right?
yes, yep. And quite often, sometimes it's written by someone, I think that's not an attorney, and, can imagine what you get. So, it's difficult to deal with, but back to what Alex said, when it gets to a large piece of land, like the Hunt Brown or Hunt Murray stuff, those surveys could get really expensive because it's
If it's-
actually sometimes 15 acres.
Right, well, so that would be my
That's-
question to you, Marie, is if you wanted these regs to change and to have a survey be required for boundary line adjustments, what would the extent of that survey need to be?
Right.
Would it only be
The
the
line.
portion of land being transferred, being adjusted, or would it be the
The
entirety of
problem
both
is, the
parcels?
problem is if the other part isn't surveyed, how do they know even where to measure
Right.
from?
Yeah, you do have
They
to
would have
go a
to do
little
the whole
It's
beyond.
an
thing.
issue on the bigger ones, and I don't know what to say.
I mean,
But that's-
having a, over a certain acreage, because for the small adjustments that resolve neighbor disputes, it is hard to support a survey when it's cost prohibitive.
So that was my question. Good point, Maggie. So are you talking about all of everything? Like, I thought the sale of land to a joiner went a little further, and it was for the purposes of ag or forestry.
No,
Is that
so
another
that's a
section?
whole nother category,
Right,
yes.
that's the one where the bigger ones are, more often.
Yeah,
That's my
I'd
impression.
say you're right about that. So what Marie's referring to is that this whole section of the subdivision, by the way, of the subdivision regs, talks about types of transfers that are not subdivisions. And so they get special sort of exemption from the subdivision regs. And those include currently boundary line adjustments, transfer of land to adjoiners, which is larger amounts of land being transferred, and lots for agriculture or forestry or conservation. And so, in these changes,
Creating lots?
yeah,
for-
yeah, you
Yes.
can actually,
But-
under our current regs, you
Yes.
can subdivide, well, quote unquote subdivide, and create a new lot without going through the subdivision review process,
If it
if
is
that lot is
used.
for forest, ag, or
Yeah,
conservation.
it can only be used for those purposes, John.
And you
And
have
if-
to prove that it's.
It has to be
meeting
written into the deed.
standards.
Yeah.
Well, it just has to be, language has to be included in the
Right.
deed to that effect.
And if you choose to change that down the road, then for sure you have to come
You
back.
have to come
Yeah,
back
have to come
Yeah.
back and go
Yeah.
through the subdivision review process, yeah.
So, you know,
And that,
So
those
that's
don't
another thing.
require, those don't currently require a
I know,
survey
and they're
either.
difficult too, but, so I'm more lenient on that one in my mind because I realize it could cost a lot. But the smaller ones, I just think that
You think
people
it's
would be
money,
so
money
much-
well spent?
money very well spent, because someday it could be a problem for them, but that's
Isn't
my
it-
2 cents.
Isn't it true, though, that maybe the larger projects have some potential? Why are people doing this? You know, if I'm gonna
It-
put my land into agriculture,
It's,
it's not just gonna sit out there with the word agriculture
They
written on it. They're gonna use
Yeah.
it for agriculture, which I expect would bring some kind of income.
Well,
it's more
so,
common in the I'm sorry.
go ahead, go ahead.
It's
Or
more
forest.
common in the forestry that I've seen in recent years. And so someone has land and he can't afford to pay his taxes, so he sells to an adjoining landowner who's already in current use. And quite often they add it to their current use land and they do use it, like you said.
Right.
And so it's a good policy that we allow this, I think.
I think the example that comes to my mind right away, that was a very positive example, was the conservation of the Lafreniere farm on the north end of town, right off 116 where the Leaning Barn used to be. And anyways, successful conservation project, the Hinesburg Land Trust was involved, all that good stuff, sold to a new farmer.
Two new farmers.
We're working with them to try to do maybe an integrated ag use there. It's all very exciting. But as a part of that conservation project, I want to say of the 300 and some odd acres that was the Lafreniere farm, about 100 acres of it was given to the Garvey farm, which was an abutting dairy farm next door.
Existing farm.
Yes.
And the way that 100 acres was transferred was not a boundary line adjustment. It had to, because of the conservation funding or landowner desires or both, it had to go as a lot. So it went as one of these lots for conservation or ag purposes. And in that case, I'm not convinced there was a big pot of money or at the end of that agricultural rainbow to pay for us, a survey. But actually, I think one was done. So
think the
maybe.
Land
There
Trust
was-
does
There
usually.
was, the project was basically headed up by Vermont Land Trust, with Hinesburg Land Trust being the local
Yeah.
face, and we had obligations for fundraising and so forth, but there was a substantial amount of project costs that were developed. The budget was developed by
Yeah.
Vermont Land Trust, and we went to Vermont Housing Conservation Board for some money. We raised money locally. The two farmers, both local farmers, by the way,
Yeah.
that were gonna split this Lafreniere piece up, they gave some breaks, they did some bargain sale. So money came into that from a lot of different locations, took care of the survey.
It did take, yeah, you're
You
right.
know?
I was thinking that a survey
But-
might have made it difficult, but they did
No,
one, so
there,
it
there
didn't, it
would
didn't
have
stop
been
the
no,
project.
Vermont Housing Conservation Board would not allow that to happen.
Without a survey, yeah.
You
Where
See?
did the money
The
go
land trust
from
would
the
not.
pipeline?
That's going to the
That's,
town.
it didn't go to this project.
No.
I don't know where it's going, but it didn't go to this
Did
project.
it go to the farmers?
The Lafren,
No.
you mean the money that was paid to the
Oh,
Lafreniere family?
They probably
I have no
directly.
idea.
They got
Oh,
it before
they-
they.
I think
They
they
may
got
have
it
gotten it
before the
before.
sale.
Yeah, they
Yes,
had
I
already,
think they
right,
did.
that was already
Yep,
gone
yep,
land.
yep.
And there was land in there, when you go way back in and you're up against, the land that Chuck Ross and folks over there own, it's wetland, and so there was wetland money that came in. And it's not gonna be farmed, it's gonna be preserved as part of that wetland. So, again, there was a lot of sources of money in, and it was a, quote, big project. So if
Yeah,
big projects come in like that with lots of money, telling them they have to have a survey.
well, again, and you guys can craft this however you like, as proposed currently, the option to create a lot for ag, forest, or conservation we're not proposing to
Not
change
right
that
now.
much
I
or
Right.
require surveys of it. What I really wanted to have the conversation about is whether to collapse these boundary line adjustment transfer of land and honor Marie's desire to see those require a survey. But you could broaden that and say,
Good
well,
place
maybe we
to
should
start.
require a survey for these conservation lots too, I don't know. But that's not how it's written currently. Actually,
those-
as it's written currently, still doesn't require the survey, that's why I wanted to bring up the conversation,
I'm
so.
sorry I jumped ahead.
How many of these a year? would you say?
Not very many. Last year we had two or three maybe.
Yeah,
There's still one that's hanging
we
out
report
there.
on them in the town report,
Not a lot.
the zoning
maybe.
administrator does each year, so I don't
There's
think I have
one
that
or so
handy.
each year, it seems like.
Yeah,
Would
it's
you just-
definitely no more than a
Could you make
handful.
them just reset the pins from where they believe their lot was and now what's added on?
And both sides agree?
Yeah, you'd need to have a surveyor involved
Well,
at
you
that
already
point,
think that the lot ends here.
right?
What's changed?
It,
Now
that,
you've added 10 feet to it.
Just with, you just
I don't
never
think
know
that
if
you
they're
can
not
move a
surveyed.
pin
No.
though without having done the research to know
Right.
whether it's in the right place to begin with,
Yeah.
you know? And you want a licensed surveyor monkeying with pins, you don't want just an average landowner doing that.
So how do we know they even needed to adjust 10 feet?
We don't. Exactly. They
Yeah,
think
they-
they do in their
they-
deeds.
Survey it to
They,
find out.
they're, they may just have deeds to begin with and no surveys with anything. I mean, there's a lot of that in this town, a lot of it, and it doesn't mean a lot sometimes.
Yeah.
People get disappointed, and really, the survey is the gold standard, if you
It-
wanna talk about it that way.
I agree with Marie,
Right.
but I think Marie would also agree with me that surveys can also be a Pandora's box.
They can,
So what you think you own, you have a survey, and suddenly you realize that the land that you thought your neighbor was impacting, that they needed to buy from you, turns out you don't even own it,
Right.
or some other neighbor. I mean, surveys can totally change
they can.
what people.
That's what life's about, though. We
That's
have to
what-
deal with reality.
That's it,
You know?
thank you, Ralph.
I'm not sure that you always do want to deal with reality. Sometimes staying in
Surveys
your,
can be wrong too, Alex,
Well,
sometimes.
that's-
I've had that happen to me. We've
That's true.
personally had that happen.
Well, I think this is part of the community growing up.
Yes, I agree.
Well,
At
and
least
so
to
I-
start with the smaller ones.
I agree with you, Rolf, but I do think that that there's a large section of Hinesburg that has not yet grown up, isn't growing up anytime soon, and for some of those landowners, I think you need to understand this will be a large burden on them to deal with. I've got a family member. We inherited these two lots. We just need to do a boundary line adjustment to fix this. And what do you mean? I have to hire a
So
surveyor?
what would you do?
But Alex, can I just put a caveat in here
Yeah.
and then you can answer? I think if you talk to other towns, we're probably the only one around that has this.
Yeah, I don't know. That's true.
I
What-
hear that from other people that I
So-
network with.
So Westford,
what?
Other
where,
towns don't allow
Has
this.
what?
Why do we
No
allow?
survey.
No survey, right.
yeah, so Westford, where I used to work and live, you're right. Even for minor boundary line adjustments, a survey was required.
And
And that's a rural town, like
Yeah.
Hinesburg.
So that's another point I wanted to
Yeah.
offer. Now Ralph had a question or a statement for
Well,
you to
you asked me
comment.
what I would do. And I'm probably not the right one to listen to because I'm a bureaucrat and part of me wants things to work, but the other part of me wants things to be easy. I would leave it the way it is because it's not broken. You know, the old saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Well, the current boundary line adjustment process where you can just walk in, two landowners can sign a piece of paper, get a zoning permit, and file some deeds to swap a little slice of land between them. We do it a couple times a year. It's never blown up on our faces yet. Seems like it helps people. Why would we change that system if it's not broke?
But the deeds are meaningless.
Yes, that's kind of the
Literally.
point I'm saying.
If you asked a
Literally.
surveyor, I bet you they would say yes. If you
Well-
asked the attorneys who drafted them, they probably would not agree with you.
No, I can't imagine.
Doesn't have to be an attorney.
Saying
So-
that it's really describing what's there without a survey.
So, so there is an attorney involved in this transaction?
Sometimes not. There are some deeds that are written, people write
That's-
them themselves.
Yeah, Marie's right. You would
It's even
expect
worse.
that an attorney
Yes,
would be
you would.
crafting, a legal document for filing
Yeah.
with the land records, but she's right, sometimes.
How
it's
do you
not the
survey a
case.
piece of land between parcels that aren't surveyed.
They go to other ones that are, sometimes, a
So
lot
that's
of
where the
times.
money starts.
Well, you have to, I think what a basic surveyor does is they sit in the vault and research the deed history and read the descriptions of the lots in words. Then they go out and look for actual monumentation on the ground, whether it's from a prior survey or just, trees, fences and the like. And so if you've got two parcels that have not been surveyed that want to adjust a line between them, you're gonna have to survey
No, I'm
that
talking
at least.
about two, you're in between two parcels that weren't.
They'll go to the ones that are, and work from there
Far away.
towards, yeah. There's someone coming in next week for a permit before the DRB that's going off surveys we've had. They've not had any surveys. That's what right? That's what happens, and so,
Well, can we just take this one
Yes,
step at a
sir.
time though, so we can make it through this? It sounds like maybe you're amenable to collapsing the two types of adjustments into just a boundary line adjustment. Am I right about that? Is everyone sort of okay with that?
Yes. Yeah.
So then the question is survey. Should there be a survey? It sounds like most of you feel like a survey makes sense. Is that where we're at?
You know,
I haven't
it
decided
makes
yet. Okay.
sense, and I think in a perfect world, and I believe in accuracy and precision, so I can understand wanting that and needing that, but, it seems like, as you mentioned, just a couple of neighbors coming in wanting to do, a simple transfer, that is, as you said, that's an easy enough thing that we can offer without having people go through the expense and the time of a survey. I think about my property, I bought it, it wasn't surveyed. The realtor said it was this many acres, the town says it's this many acres. Does it matter? Not to me so much, but, I guess it seems, desirable, but, I would be willing to let it go, not require a survey.
I don't think we should require it.
My feeling is that it may be simple to leave it as it is, no survey is required. But that's right now, and that's not when either family on either side of some adjusted line needs to or chooses to put their land up for sale. Then the question's gonna come from the buyers, where's that line?
And they can
How
do a
much
survey.
do I own?
Well, if it's just a written deed, they don't do the adjustment, then it's still just gonna be a written deed when it's sold. So it's not gonna be any different. If we require a survey to be done, let's say they can't come up with the money to do the survey, so they don't do the swap,
Right,
and they sell the land,
right.
then they're gonna be selling
Still an
a written deed.
undefined line. It's just gonna be this written deed defining both properties, and the line's still not surveyed. So are we back to the same place, is what you're saying? If we let it go now, it'll come up later. What happens then? Do we require it to be surveyed when those people?
We don't require surveys when houses or when lots are bought and sold, do we?
No.
So it could be 100 years before it comes up.
It just came up in my neighborhood. The house opposite us was just sold, and the surveyor was out there, and I could see his pink marks, and I'm thinking, that's where our boundary is? And I knew that ours was surveyed. So I support the surveying, just to make it clearer to everybody. I mean, if it's a 10-foot land transfer, maybe not, but,
What do you think, Dennis?
I'm gonna go with Alex, I guess. I mean, if it hasn't been a real big issue. I'm fine with it. I can just see where somebody, I've been there and done that, my parents have been there and done it, and it's costs, when you have a big piece of land and then you start doing the survey for all of it, it costs a lot of money. But for simple changes, I'm fine with just leaving it the way it is.
Is there some way to establish how much land is impacted in terms of the change, and if it's less than a certain amount, that doesn't require a survey? And if it's more than, whether it's just a boundary or whether it's going into agriculture or whatever?
Yeah, we could certainly, I don't think there's anything
we
that would
establish
preclude us
kind of
from establishing
which would-
an acreage limit, above which you have to have a survey.
Which would mean even a big parcel that was simply working out a boundary adjustment between an adjacent parcel, just because that's a big parcel, doesn't mean they have to survey that whole thing.
Well, that would be, anytime you're gonna require a survey for this kind of thing, we would need to be clear about what needed to be surveyed. The
Right.
entire lot, or both lots involved in the transfer, or just the
Or
portion
just the line,
that's being adjusted.
right.
And so we'd need to be clear about that. If a
I mean,
survey
I would think
were
if there was an
required.
issue between two neighbors about who owns what, I mean, if it was that big of an issue, whichever one of them would have it surveyed,
And
right?
so-
I mean,
Depends on the resources of the two neighbors
then you go
involved.
from the survey to the deed, and then which one do you go by? Right? I mean,
Yeah.
does a survey,
Typically,
What's-
Marie, you correct me if I'm wrong, but typically a survey trumps,
Always.
a
It's the
written,
gold
a written deed.
It's the gold
even if that
standard.
person's been using that land for,
Yes, absolutely, a survey always
Well,
trumps.
so that's a good point. A survey can delineate what the ownership is, and then whether or not there's adverse possession, because
it's a
for the last
civil issue.
25 years, you've been maintaining that as your property is a different
That becomes
matter
a civil issue then.
Right, that's
right,
a
but I mean,
court
I think
issue,
that's where
not-
the issue usually comes.
with
Getting-
neighbor disputes, yeah, sometimes.
Well, I can see why you described it as opening up a Pandora's
Yeah.
box.
Right, that's where I think that would happen.
So I sense disagreement on the
Definitely
commission.
disagreement.
Some of you think the survey is a good idea, others think not, so.
So,
Maybe we-
let's get a count. Who thinks that this survey is a good idea? Who
Well,
would vote
Has there
for it?
been a lot of issues with it, or there hasn't been?
In our office, there hasn't been, but Marie is the receiver of all these things, so I don't know what your tax mapper's been telling you for the last 5 or 10 years.
They don't like it.
They would rather see a
They don't
survey.
like, anybody
Is-
that I network or work with doesn't like it and says, why does your town allow that, other towns don't? It's not gonna be accurate, so, that's just, it is
But
what
I
it
mean,
is.
before the DRB, is that why the tax map isn't accurate?
Right, that's one of the reasons, absolutely.
So
Because-
when the tax maps were initially
Yeah.
created, and even now, most lots in Hinesburg are not surveyed.
Right.
So when the tax map was originally created way back when, that tax mapper had to look at each deed
Yeah, it was a
and
lot
try
of
to
work.
construct polygons and then
Right.
match them up
Right.
across the
Right.
whole town, and it was a Herculean effort.
Yep.
But it was rife with errors, both because the deeds are poorly described land.
Right.
One deed and the next don't necessarily match up, and because there were likely some mistakes. It was done by a human, so.
Sure.
So yeah, the tax maps, we always tell people, like, you can't rely on these for actual ownership, or don't think that they're survey
Just work
quality.
tools.
It's just general for, planning purposes, and actually, most importantly, for tax purposes,
Yeah.
just to get a sense of how many acres we should be taxing you on.
But
That-
they're
that was
used
the-
greatly by your office
Yes.
and my office.
Yeah. And I don't dispute what Marie's saying. A lot of people put a lot of faith that they shouldn't in the tax map lines. But it's parcel lines. Right now, the state of Vermont's in the process of creating a statewide parcel layer. So there's contracts for the next 3 years with every town in the state to create a uniform tax map, parcel map, so that it can be assembled together and have a statewide map of all the parcels. So,
But it's only as good as,
right, I'm
the
just saying that
information's
even though
put in
we
it.
say they shouldn't be used for survey purposes and they're rife with errors,
People think of
they're
that
still
way.
used for planning purposes
Absolutely.
across the whole state.
and they're very helpful.
Yeah, they're super helpful.
I mean, all the time, things are getting better. And
So
don't
if-
get me
if you-
wrong,
If you find an error, you can come in and have it changed?
If you have
No.
a survey,
if you have a survey.
that's what Marie tells everyone, right?
You have to have a survey. I mean, I'm not saying, these people that have done sale of land to a joiner, specifically people from Ben Hunt, that's the biggest one. We do show it as best we can on the tax map,
Right.
but then it will,
But
only
if-
as best we can.
But if a landowner comes in to Marie and says, you've appraised me way more than my property should
Yeah.
be because you think I have 12 acres and I'm pretty sure I only have 7, your answer is,
Get a survey.
show me a survey. I'd be happy to make the correction, but I
Correct.
need a survey.
Yeah, that's all we can do.
It seems like the place that a survey impacts our civic interactions with one another is when a piece of land is being bought and sold.
Yep.
We don't care about it. We've been talking about here, we'll get our planning done, we'll get our
Right.
zoning work done by using what we already have.
Yep.
Most of which is not based on a survey.
Right.
But it works at the level that we need it to work at.
Yeah.
Until you're a guy buying a piece of land or selling a piece of land, and it's gotta go through that negotiation and that legality, the bank loaning you money
Yeah,
needs to
but-
have a survey
Or
and so
subdividing,
forth,
if you wanna go.
Or
But
subdividing
I
and
don't,
so
I don't know that
forth.
we've seen any problems with sales. I mean, it's
I
not as
don't-
if banks and title searchers are coming to Hinesburg saying, you don't have,
I will speak to that, though.
what?
Banks really don't wanna touch pieces of property that have a lot of acreage. They don't wanna lend people money on it. I see it all the time, cause they don't really know what's there. They're interested in if they've been through a subdivision and it's a good subdivided lot. But when you get very large, even, I'm gonna guess, maybe even like 25, 30 acres, they're pretty leery about all that. Cause they know if it hasn't been surveyed, who knows what's there? Plus, they don't know what your town would allow you to do with the land. So that does become an issue, and I do hear that from people. People will call me up, especially people that are current using it, and say, oh, well, I got an appraisal, and it's different than what you have me assessed for. And I always say back to them, but you own a lot of land, and fee appraisers don't know what that land is worth. We have to put a value on it. They don't. So that's one, I just want to speak to that it does impact people, and they do get very upset about that.
But the day-to-day sales and
Correct.
transfers that happen in
Smaller
Hinesburg are
ones.
not being held up for lack of a survey.
No,
Yeah.
you're right.
Let's
Correct.
get back to this, cause I hate to spend an entire hour on just the first, just on we're just at the beginning of subdivisions. Let's get a count of how many people think that the survey, requiring a survey is a good idea and would.
No matter what. In terms of
Look.
this line, whether it's a big lot, little lot,
I thought we were
neighbors
just talking about
arguing,
little ones,
no
right?
matter what, survey.
Well,
that what
we're
you're
we're
asking?
gonna combine the
Right,
two,
yeah.
the
Right, push those
agriculture
together.
I thought Alex
conservation.
said no to that,
Yeah.
but maybe I misunderstood. Didn't you just say we're just talking right now about 2.1, which is not land, sale of land to a joiner for forestry or ag purposes? Even though I brought that in, which I probably should apologize for, because it's complicating things.
Well, I think you can just have a conversation right now about boundary line adjustments.
Yeah, that's what
Not the creation of lots
I
for
would
ag, forest
propose that.
conservation, just boundary line adjustments.
Correct.
John's point is boundary line adjustments of what size?
Right,
And I think, Maggie, you're saying just any kind to begin with, like
Right, all boundary adjustments,
100 square feet,
gotcha.
Right.
10 acres,
doesn't matter.
whatever
Right.
it is, do you think a
Right.
survey should be required?
Yeah, because we're basically absorbing this whole transfer of land to adjoiners within this.
Right.
That's what's being merged.
Right.
Yeah, so we could adjust any amount of land, small or big. So you want a show of hands?
Yes.
Not including Don and myself.
Yeah. So who says yes to the, John, did I see a?
Yes to what?
Means
To
requires.
requiring the
Require
survey.
the survey.
Okay. So it looks like we've got 4 in favor.
So I can write it up that way, add the survey requirement, and then when you have a 9-member board someday,
Okay.
you
Well,
might
that
want
sounds
to vote
good.
with all 9 of you, since 4 is not a majority of this board.
Right.
Right.
So
When I
Push-
hear
push
that
that one.
all these surrounding communities basically have the
Yeah.
same requirement,
We could give some call, maybe give some calls.
Yeah, I'll check.
yeah,
I'll
that
check.
would be
You could
good
check.
information
I-
to have.
I think that's what I've heard, but
I think you're right, but I've never done
Yeah, I don't
I've
know
never
for
done the
sure
survey.
either,
The
how many.
survey. I've never done the quiz. All I know is Westford. Check other towns. Okay, got it.
You know, I'm leery about deciding what we think we should do into the future based on what's happened in the past. Whether or not we're getting a lot of these or not many at all, I don't want to have that play a big part in a decision about what we do in the future. So that kind of argument doesn't make much difference when I think about it. And I agree kind of with what Rolf said, Hinesburg needs to grow up. This is what's happening. And I swear, the technology that we have these days with
Right.
GPS, I can see surveying changing dramatically when you can pinpoint a location within a meter.
Yep, I agree.
And you can do that now if you're the US military or the British military or any of the big militaries can do that closely. A guy will walk around with a little device and he'll say, "Is this the corner?" "Yeah." Push the button and it gets recorded, and he puts something in the ground right there and walks the length of whatever and asks the question again, "Is this where you guys want to make these adjustments?" "Yeah." Push the button, there it is.
They
If
do
they
that
don't have
today, but the price hasn't gone down.
No, I
Pardon?
know, it's true.
It's some
It's
truth
like
to that.
plumbing. Plumbing
Yeah.
is way easier than it used to be.
Yeah,
Price
right,
hasn't gone
electrical,
down.
right,
It's gone way
electrical
up.
also, right.
it's only architecture that's cheapened in price.
Depends on which field you're in, right?
Okay, so the next sections listed on your summary are sections 3.1, 3.2, and 3.3. I don't think these require much discussion, but I will walk you through them. Basic revisions to remove some outdated language that doesn't comply with statute or with our actual practice regarding when applications, how far ahead applications should be submitted for subdivision, and clarifying how DRB decisions have to be, when they have to be solidified, finalized. So in section 3.1.1, we used to have language that talked about submitting applications at least 10 days prior to a regularly scheduled meeting. Hasn't been that way for years. We take the application whenever you want to submit it, and it's complete, and then you get on the schedule when the schedule is available. And if there are, 3 meetings full ahead of you, then you're gonna probably wait 6 weeks to get onto a meeting, not 10 days. So anyways, we're just striking
Do you
that.
agree, Alex, though, that sometimes we get applications that we see that aren't complete?
Right, so that's a staff problem, not an applicant problem. You may be seeing one of those on Tuesday, my apologies. No.
So shouldn't we just tell them?
What we tell people, we have an internal policy, and I think it's good to keep it internal and not have it be reflected in the regs. And our internal policy has evolved over time based on input from the board. Currently, it's if it's an application that has to be warned in the paper, there's a specified time period, 15 days prior, and we have to advertise. We have to get the notice to the paper before that. So we tell people 4 weeks. You have, it has to at least be into our office complete 4 weeks before a meeting. For non-warned application like sketch plan review for subdivisions, which is the section we're talking about right now, we tell people 2 weeks minimum. So, and that may change over time depending on board, edicts to staff or staffing issues upstairs. Anyways, the thought here is to get rid of this thought that you can submit something 10 days before a meeting and just be on that meeting. That's just not the way it works.
No.
So that's 3.1.1. The rest of the changes in these sections, if you were to scroll through them, are similarly innocuous.
Just have a question.
Yes.
3.1.6,
Yes.
just above the red area in that, their failure, so too, that confused, I didn't know I think there's grammatically something.
There is a grammatical
Okay.
error there, you're right.
Which
So
one
that's a
is
good,
that?
that's a good catch.
It's-
3.1.6, which, on your subdivision document, housekeeping document, should be page 6.
Yep, page 6.
And so there's some strikeouts that talk about DRBs getting a decision within 30 days to an applicant, which is not per statute, it's 45 days. There's a new sentence above that, and then Barb just caught a grammatical problem in the sentence that's not indicated for any changes. It starts failure so to act. That sounds like Old English or something.
It
It's,
does.
yeah, failure to act is, so the so just gets deleted. I'll make a note of that. 3.1.6.
Failure so to act.
It's, I'm reading a
Stand
book on,
aside.
by Winston Churchill, or on Winston Churchill, and yes, it would have been so to act.
Okay,
Thus
thankfully.
it shall be.
Right, right.
So the substantive change there, aside from that correction, is just to clarify that there'll be a written decision and to delete the 30 days thing, which is inaccurate. In section 3.2.2, there are some changes again that get rid of outdated timing regarding submission of application 20 days before a hearing. That's not accurate anymore, or if ever it was. And just revamping the public notice section so that it's referring to the right statutory sections. 3.2.3, this is under the minor subdivision heading. Again, clarifying that the grounds for the decision will be in a for the ruling will be in a written notice of decision, which we are required to do under state statute. We can't just phone people up and say, this is what we said. We have to provide it in writing. Has to explain why we ruled the way we did. And then the more substantive change in this series of sections is on page 8, which is, if I scroll up here, section 3.2.4, number 2, D. If you're on page 8, it just looks like it's letter D. And so this is a new provision that we're proposing to add to the submission requirements that compels an applicant to provide evidence that they have worked with the town road foreman on a driveway curb cut or access permit.
Should there be some kind of a timeline when that has to be answered?
Well, so what this section talks about are the submission requirements for a minor subdivision and what needs to be submitted with that application. So this is just directing the applicant to give us evidence that you have, that you filed a permit application with the highway foreman, or the
Including
agency.
feedback, though. What
Yeah.
happens if you don't get the feedback?
Well, so we can't govern that in our regulation. That's an internal issue of how long it takes our road foreman to get back to people. It's a highly understaffed department traditionally, so often it does take a bit longer than people would like, but the road foreman is often embroiled in other very important matters. But to the extent that we might want him to do things faster, we can work on that internally.
I think he tries to be pretty timely. I would think it would be more problem with the state, but I don't know, because I don't deal with that.
Yeah, from
you
our
don't know.
perspective, applicants have full control over when they submit an application.
okay.
They don't always have full control over when they get their
Right.
septic design from their engineer, or their survey done, or maybe a permit from the state, or input from the road foreman. We're just trying to make it so that when we do hand it to the DRB, most of these
It's all
items
there.
are included and there aren't things hanging out there. And in the past, this has been an issue where the DRB has seen something, road foreman hasn't ruled on it yet, and then it has to come back because the access isn't gonna work where it was first proposed. So that's a proposed addition, substantive, but I think, reasonable. And then in section 3.3, this is just the way this whole few sections are constructed. We're repeating some of the same stuff regarding deadlines and submission requirements and the like. Yeah, so that's all of 3, 1, 2, and 3.
Well, I just love to see entire sections crossed out in red. It's so satisfying.
If you don't have any questions on all those red lines, we could move on to section 324. Oh, no, we've already talked about that. 324 is the road access permit information, right?
663?
So we can move to 663, which you have already talked about. So if you remember, in the zoning regulations, we talked about closing a loophole that we created where projects under 10,000 square feet of impervious surface, if you took a strict reading of the regulations, weren't required to submit anything regarding their stormwater runoff, and so we wanted to change that. This is just copying that same language and correction into the subdivision regs because the two regulations say the same thing about stormwater. So nothing new to see here. So moving on to section 684. Oh, right, so this was something Peter, our two zoning administrators ago, wanted to see changed. Currently, 684, which is the section of the subdivision review related to sewage disposal. The way it's currently reads is that before the zoning administrator can issue a certificate of occupancy, so that somebody who's built a home can actually move into the home, that is, the certificate of occupancy is the last part of the building permit process. So you get you do a subdivision's approved, you come in, get a building permit for the house from the ZA, they issue the permit, you go build the house, and then before you get to move in, the ZA comes out and looks at it, make sure you actually built what you said. And this does require the ZA to have a certification from the design engineer of the septic system that it was installed as approved. We've never done that. The state does that.
Isn't that redundant?
It is redundant because the state requires that to be
Yeah.
filed in the land records as a function of the wastewater permit that they give. And we're actually not supposed to be monkeying around with
Right.
wastewater stuff that we're preempted by the state. So not only have we not complied with our own regs on this front, the ZA has never done this. I don't think we're supposed to be doing this, so it's proposed for elimination. Okay, so the next section is 612.2.
Shall instead of may.
Yes. And this is actually, I don't think this is substantive, I think this is a construction issue. As it reads right now, these are agricultural area standards. So if you're doing a residential subdivision in an area that has ag and farms, we want you to keep the residential uses and those wells associated with the houses away from the farm fields so that there isn't contamination from pesticides, and hopefully there's gonna be less complaints to the farmer who we are favoring over the new subdivision. So we talk about, you gotta minimize conflicts, and you have to have, it says buffer zones a minimum of 200 feet from residences and wells to lot lines of ag operations may be required unless a smaller setback can be demonstrated to have no adverse effect. Peter always thought that was odd. If you can demonstrate that it can be closer, then why do you say may? You should say it shall be 200, and then you have to provide evidence otherwise. It's just a clearer, stronger statement. I don't know that it matters a lot, but I agree with him. I think it makes sense to make the one word change. So if you're okay with that.
Yes.
7.1 is related to our general application requirements for subdivision, so copies that you're supposed to submit and application fees. This is just changing to, again, what our internal practice has been for several years, which is to require not just paper, but digital PDF files of application materials. So that's
And
codifying what we do now.
your notes mention that you help people to scan stuff.
Yes,
if they don't
yes,
have.
for the folks who are just, especially at the sketch plan review phase where they haven't necessarily hired a surveyor or anyone yet, if they've just done a sketch or we've helped them with a sketch, we'll make those digital for them. That's not an issue. But it really does help with regard to the last step of the process where we have professionally produced plans to make sure that we have those digitally. Not an issue. Most of the professionals out there are doing that now anyways. So that's 7.1. Next one, we're almost done. 7.7. Oh, right. So this clarifies what I was mentioning before. When you have lots that are part of a previously approved subdivision and you want to make a change to a boundary line, the state statute says if you're changing an approved recorded plat that's in your land records, you have to have a public hearing. It has to go through a process. So this is the section that talks about the process, and this language just clarifies that. Because some people just don't get it when we tell them, like, I'm just doing a boundary line adjustment. We're like, I know, it just does seem like a boundary line adjustment, but your lot's part of a 7-lot subdivision from 2002, and so to do that adjustment, this is the protocol. So this just codifies that, hopefully clarifies, and also clarifies when we are gonna do a formal legal notice in the paper and when we're just gonna provide a butters notice and how far ahead we'll be doing that. Which you can take a look. If you have any concerns, let me know. This is generally how we do it today, and we're just trying to codify that in the regs. So that when I move to the Bahamas and I take Mitch and Suzanne with me, that the next people, won't have to make this stuff up. It'll just be in the regs.
You're on your own if you go down.
I was about to say the Virgin
Right.
Islands, but
No,
that's
you're
that's
totally on your
off
own if you
limits,
go
yeah.
anywhere down there.
Yeah. Yeah, so those are the revisions to 7.7. If there are no questions. Section 8.3 is the section on enforcement and penalties. And this was just a very outdated section. It talked about $50, $50 fines, and that's all been changed in statutes. We're now up to $200 per day. Rather than trying to list that and then have to update it when the statute changes, I just minimized it and said, it'll be according to the statute.
Yeah.
There's a lot of red marks. Yes, right.
And then there are just a couple of definition revisions. So in section 10.1, which is I say section 10.1, it's actually 9. My summary's wrong. Section number. Article 9 is the definition section of your subdivision regs. In any case, if you go to Article 9, which is on page 36, we've got definition of boundary adjustment. We talked a lot about that. It's defined in that section we referred to, so it just refers you back to that. But then we clarify building envelope. So this is a substantive change, very substantive, in fact. reflects what I think has been our practice for some time, but it is a substantive change. So, the easy part is what's been tacked on to the end of the sentence, which says that where structures may be located or as otherwise specified by the DRB. So that's just basically saying during a subdivision review process, the DRB and the applicant can come to some agreement about, I want dog houses to be outside of the envelope or sheds or whatever. That just adds flexibility. Hopefully that's fine. The big change is that currently building envelope as we've defined it only applies to the principal structure of a lot. So if you have a house and you want to build a barn, you can build the barn wherever you want, even if the subdivision said, well, there's a wetland over there, there's a this over there, there's a that over there, don't build over there, we have an envelope. If you want to build you build a house, you put it in the building envelope. You want to build a garage, detached, not a, pretty barn anymore, just a standard garage. Currently, under this definition, you could build that outside of the building envelope. In a lot of our DRB decisions, we have been specifying all structures, not just principal structures, in order to clarify that. And then sometimes there's dialogue during the review about, well, what about accessory structures that aren't, accessory dwelling, like apartments? Can I build those outside if it's a barn? And they have that discussion. So anyways, the proposal is to strike the word principal, have building envelope be clear to refer to structures in general, and then allow the discretion to happen during the DRB review if there's going to be some special dispensation. I think this is more consistent with the way other municipalities handle it. Building envelopes are meant to be where you put structures, not just the principal structure, but generally all structures.
I think we use building envelopes way too much.
Yeah,
I agree. I think your board
It should
over the
be-
years
it
has
should be
gotten
more
very
about-
building envelope happy.
Where you can't build, not where you can. Because it's,
So-
I disagree. A building envelope used to be, certain areas on your land that are protected, wetlands, whatever. Ledge. Now, we require every subdivision or whatever we do, we require, I just disagree. Well, you already know that, but,
Yeah, well, no, I'm with you. I think that,
I mean, people should be able to build wherever they want on
I
their
think that
land,
the-
as long
the-
as it's not.
I think the default should be the building envelope is just the setbacks. You can build across your whole lot.
And we're using
But
it
I-
for everything
But
now.
I think that there are definitely many cases in subdivision where it makes sense to
Well, yeah.
not allow building in certain constrained areas.
I agree, that's what we should specify, not, we don't have a reason for it, we just say, if someone comes in with a 2-acre building envelope, we think that's way too big.
So, so your staff, is on that wavelength and should be helping you ensure that your building envelopes are justified and based on something in reality, like preservation of agricultural soils, wetland protection, that sort of thing. But I agree, there have been times.
How
when-
many times do we have people come back and wanna change it?
A lot.
Yeah.
Quite often.
Yeah.
I think that you're bringing up a larger issue, which would be
Right.
a fun research project to maybe do before you move forward with these, is to think about whether this could be flipped. I've never seen that done.
Yeah.
But could
So
you,
can't,
could instead of being a
have to stay
building
away
envelope,
from
could you have a
this.
non-building envelope?
I think that's what it
to-
should
To
be.
indicate where you can't
you can
build.
build anywhere.
I couldn't
up
imagine
to
having a
that
building
point.
envelope
Yeah.
on my land.
Who determines that? I mean, then you're really into some resource analysis or.
Don't
Where's
some of the
deer
state rules
yard? Where's the
determine that?
wetland?
Don't some of the state rules determine that, like wetlands? Like I'm thinking of the lot where your
Or
your
ledge
cousin
or-
built on Pond Brook Road.
Mhm.
There's I heard nobody bought that lot for years because there was so little space where you could build on it. Well, who said that's where you can build? I thought it was the state. It's very wet and it does have wetlands and
It's sometimes, it's mostly just
But-
a function of the standards in our regulations
In
decided
ours.
by the development review board.
Okay.
So the regulations say
Slope
protect
and
steep
wet
slopes,
Yeah,
and
wet, all that, yeah.
especially.
all of that you could use
I just think,
that
and I
draw
totally
a
agree
line.
with that, I just
yeah,
think we've
right, me
gone
too.
too far with it, I think.
Yeah, well, it's really 6 of one, half a dozen of another. You're gonna have to draw a line at some point.
Yeah.
Right.
Whether you call it,
Based
you can
on
build
what,
on this
though?
side of the line, or you can't build on the other side of the line, there's still a line. But.
I agree, but I
Yeah,
mean, we
but-
usually say,
I agree.
There's lots that you could build on the whole property if you wanted to, and we
Yeah.
still make them do a building envelope.
Well, somebody here in this room chairs that board. Maybe you ought to get that board.
Make
on.
some noise about it up there.
It doesn't always work.
Well,
Always hear
I
the
think
track.
there's conventional practice, which is you try to have a building envelope that gives a future owner enough elbow room to build a variety of structures, house, barn, garage, accessory apartment, but also so that you can be clear about where the access to the property is coming in, whether there are going to be impacts on sensitive resources, and also whether you like to admit it or not, whether there are going to be impacts on neighbors. And even though our regs don't specifically protect neighbor views, we often hear from neighbors in the development review process. And the moment that a developer drops a building envelope there and says, well, we're gonna put the building here because we respect your concern, and even though the regs don't require us, we're gonna plant a cedar hedge and we're gonna do it here. And the neighbor says, great, I am so happy now, thank you so much. And the building envelope actually serves to move the project forward in that sense. So there's a lot of reasons for having building envelopes, some of them better than others.
Then they show up down the road later and ask you to change it. I see that a
Right,
lot.
and typically those changes are minor, and that's the frustrating part, is that they're gonna be close to where the building envelope is, but they need like an extra 50 feet
Okay.
or something like that. And because the building envelopes are on the plat, and statute says that you can't revise a plat without a public hearing, it kicks it through the review process again for what seems like a minor thing. In any case, what was proposed here was not quite as a big a conversation as Dennis just made it, but to simply require structures, not just principal structures, to be in the building envelope. I would be happy, I'm kind of interested to research if there's a way to flip that, to talk about non-buildable areas or non-buildable envelopes or something like that.
Areas.
Alex, there's a situation that we went through at land trust land, the Bissonnet Farm, when there was a lot created that the Sayers ended up buying.
Mm-hmm.
And we very definitely wanted to leave a large portion of that open because it was good agricultural land. But otherwise, you could have put a house anywhere in that area, and we pushed it to the back, to away from the road, and we pushed it up against the woods back there, the forest back there. The state actually said, nah, that's too
Yeah,
close.
bring it out some because of the bat
Pull it
habitat.
out,
Yeah.
because there were deer yards
Oh,
all
that.
through there. And so we brought it out, but it allowed the land trust as the person, we were the entity dealing with who was gonna buy what, to say, no, whoever you are, you gotta put your structures there, because the value of the rest of it, we need to leave unencumbered. And that was kind of a decision of the owner, so
Right.
I want, as an owner, to define a building area and come to the DRB and have you
Codified.
lock that in,
Yep.
essentially.
I-
I understand entirely what other people are saying, but there's good reason for
So I
building.
don't think we'd want to eliminate the
Right,
concept
and
of the
that's
building
not what-
envelope, because whether it's for a conservation subdivision or just a developer who says, I have a very specific design, I know how these lots are gonna work. Once
And
I
I
start selling
wanna-
them, I can't have one owner building where I didn't
Bolt
intend them
over
to
here.
build, because they're gonna be looking in the next guy's window. So I think allowing building envelopes to be specified is a good thing, but maybe giving the DRB the ability to define non-buildable areas as an alternative to a
Right.
specified
Right.
tight building
right.
envelope might be a nice option to
One
throw into.
or the other.
Yeah,
if
something
it-
like
I mean,
that.
Yeah.
the setbacks are supposed to take care of if you're looking at someone else's window and all that, right?
Well, yes and no. I think to the large degree, setbacks are less about looking in your window than they are about avoiding boundary line disputes and, literally shading somebody else's property.
Right.
I think that when you see sort of context-sensitive subdivision design, developers are oftentimes looking to offset the placement of houses or place houses in certain places so that there is a sense of privacy that goes well beyond just the required setback. And sometimes you can do that without specifying building envelopes, but oftentimes that's a way that they want it done. And we've seen that in the past where a person comes in and they say, hey, I want to change the building envelope. And they say, am I going to have trouble doing that? And we say, no, there's a process, but we have to know why the building envelope was placed the way it was. And some of the older subdivisions, the developer dictated it, the board just said, sure, whatever you want, and there's no rationale for why the building envelope is there. So when you, as a current board, gets to review it, it's like, well, I don't know, should we change it or not? And so sometimes it's, you can tie yourself up in knots, any which way. What we do try to do today is ensure that all of your decisions that include building envelopes are very clear in the conclusions, why the building envelope was delineated, what features it's designed to protect or preserve, so that 2 years later, when the first home buyer gets it and wants to revise it, you'll know, whether it makes sense to make the revision.
And that kind of language is included in the decision,
Yes.
okay?
Yep. So, can I do a little research on your suggestion? Are you all okay with broadening building envelope to the extent we still use it in the regs to be structures, not just principal structures?
Yep.
Yep,
Let me make a note of that. Research project, building envelope.
But that would include ag structures, all right?
Well, so that's a good question. What we tell people is, we don't regulate ag structures. We're not allowed to by state statute. However, they have to be used for ag. They have to be, qualifying structures. So we tell people, you can build that barn out of the building envelope, even if the DRB went through this big review and the neighbors were all up in arms and they didn't want to see anything outside of it. You can do it as an exempt structure, but the moment it's not used for ag, you want to park your Winnebago in it or your boat or whatever, you have a problem because it's outside of the envelope and it's an issue. So I always encourage folks in the ag sector to get the permit for the ag structure they're building, not to claim the exemption from even getting the permit, and to put it in any defined building envelope just to be safe. Sometimes they listen to me, sometimes they don't. Usually I think with the Baldwin and the Hollenbeek folks, when it's a big structure, they like to be able to use the exemption because just the zoning fee for such a large structure is substantial. And they know they're only gonna use it for ag, and so it makes sense. For folks who come in and say, hey, I wanna build a little sugar house, and this is a hobby operation, or I'm building this little barn for X number of animals, I try to get them to get the permit and stay in the building envelope if there is one, just so they're protected going forward.
That
They're
is
not-
starting to pop up on sales. I've seen a couple this summer where people rushed in to pay
Oh,
to sell.
Yeah.
Because they didn't build it, they were the second owner, and then they were selling to the third owner.
right.
Been
It's
a couple
better
of
to
those
keep
this
everything
summer.
in the
You're
envelope,
right.
which speaks to Dennis's point about it's nice when we can provide lots that have a lot of elbow room, preferably just the setbacks and not just a tiny little postage
Well, another
stamp.
thing that's happening is when someone comes in for a subdivision, they're asking to have that house put into a building envelope. The new lot plus the
Plus
existing
the
house.
existing house, right,
The one they already own, that they
Yes.
subdivided the lot out of.
Right.
They want to,
the original
after the house is built.
So like I'm living in a house on 35 acres. It's a 1875 house, and I come in and subdivide. Everyone says, "Well, sure, the new building lot, we got to
Yeah.
define where the building should go. Let's put a building envelope." But then there's the conversation of should we also institute a building envelope around the house
old
from
house.
1875?
So that's a discussion among your board members, not the people that are doing the subdivision. I was gonna say, why would they ask that?
And Dennis, you sit on both boards, so this is your opportunity as the policy-making board to say, hey, it'd be good if the regulations clarified, when you should or shouldn't do that sort of thing, if you think that's a problem. But,
I disagree with making them add a building envelope to a pre-existing.
you figure they never had one to begin with, so why should they have one now? I myself, I go back and forth on that. But in these housekeeping changes, I haven't broached that. So if you want to broach that, that's a different issue.
Well, doesn't that kind of, building envelope issue, Dennis, often come up when people are proposing additions to an existing structure?
No, like, if we have someone wants to split up a 12-acre lot,
Okay.
we're actually asking them to put a building envelope around their existing house.
Okay. And what do you think is the purpose for that requirement?
I don't know.
Well, no, so there is a purpose.
I mean, I guess,
I agree with Dennis that sometimes to me it seems a little punitive because they've lived in that house for however
Yep.
long. That house has been there since before zoning probably. There's never been a building envelope on the lot. And now that they want to create a lot next to it, suddenly we're going to restrict that area as well. But there is a purpose. The purpose is generally related to the site constraints and the sensitive natural resources. Once you enter into subdivision, we look at the entire parcel, not just the new piece you're creating. And if you happen to have prime ag soils or a wetland or steep slopes or a wildlife corridor that passes, through the lot that's being retained, it's an opportunity to
but I think
ensure
what
that
we
those
do
areas are
though is we make
protected.
the building envelope and we don't go up to the boundary line of all those restraints.
You're thinking that it gets shrunk to the little postage size.
Right, I mean,
Yeah.
it doesn't go up to all the, I think it should.
Right. It should snap to the boundaries of
Like,
the
this is where you
non-buildable
can't
area.
build and this is where
Yeah.
you can.
Well, that's what
That's
I'll.
what I
That's
think.
the same rule that you apply when you're creating a new lot.
No, we just
And
make a
if-
building envelope. We don't go up to where all the restraints are.
Well, but
But-
aren't you saying go up to where all the restraints are, whether it's on an existing lot?
Or the
that
new
has
lot,
one, or
yeah.
the
I
new
mean, I
lot,
would
either
probably-
way.
Be okay with that.
Yeah,
And also allow
more constrained building
more
envelopes when a landowner's interested.
When a landowner wants to do that,
I mean, you might get into some issues because wetlands never used to be what they are today. I mean, people could be in a wetland that never was. You know what I mean? I mean, now,
And if you
Yeah.
take away that building area, if say you did take away the building lot, building envelope, like he's suggesting,
well, not
and
take
somebody-
it away, just change it.
right, but if somebody came in for a permit and you didn't do what the other idea he has, they could just build in that wetlands and the town wouldn't have any control over it? But then they'd be breaking other rules, right? That the
For a
state-
for a wetland, they could be breaking other rules, or they could be going to get a state permit and they could be
But if
allowed
they
to do
didn't,
it.
yeah,
The more interesting case are prime ag soils.
right. okay.
So right now in Vermont, prime ag soils, limited commodity, we're not making any more
Sure.
of them. When somebody comes in for a minor subdivision, the only protection they receive is at the municipal level. There's
Okay.
no state agency that's out there saying you can't develop on those prime ag soils. That only happens if it's a larger development that triggers Act 250. So our provisions for protecting things like wildlife corridors, prime ag soils, steep slopes, the only place those resources get protection is our regs.
Okay.
And that's what these building envelopes seek to do, is to make
And
sure
I agree
that
with that, as long as it
Right.
goes out to
as long
those.
as you go to the
Okay,
boundaries.
so
So why can't your new language sort of mirror what we've already written in the
Right.
rural area zoning?
Yeah, I think
About
it-
avoiding
I think it
those
could.
resource areas?
I think it could, yep. Yeah, and I think that, based on Dennis's concern, it might be worth sticking some additional language in here to guide the DRB as to how building envelopes should be defined. That they should seek to exclude the areas that are sensitive or not buildable, rather than arbitrarily reduce the building area when there are no other constraints present, something
Right.
like that.
right,
So maybe instead of building envelope, it could be building amoeba-like structure.
Exactly.
Or something.
That sounds like really new planner language that you just invented. Yeah.
Are you suggesting that we build a wall?
And we must have hit
wall.
9:30.
Amoeba-shaped
This
wall.
amoeba-shaped wall. That's my contribution to
Amoebas,
humanity.
they move around, though. The walls of the amoeba doesn't stay stationary.
Let's
They
move
pulse.
on to the next agenda item, shall we? Are we done? We're done with
So there
subdivision.
was one more, no, wait, I didn't, oh, there isn't one
What
more. It's
one?
just tidy up in the definition of subdivision, not a subdivision, which we've already talked about. Boundary line adjustments and getting rid of transfer of land. So, yeah, you're done. Hooray.
Awesome.
Wow, that was quick. Compared to the other one, right?
So, next on the agenda is municipal planning grant project ideas. Although, actually, just to jump back, so even though we think we're finished,
Oh,
we
you're not
just keep
finished.
tossing stuff
Right.
back at you to
Right. So
spit
here,
back at us.
you
so-
tell me if I have this right. We finished the first pass of your first pass of the first draft of these housekeeping changes. So you talked about them all last year. You've now reviewed language for all of them, and now I need to give you a second draft. Because we really do need to get this to a public hearing,
Yeah.
but it doesn't sound like it's quite ready yet. So you wanna see another draft of everything, right? Maybe we don't need to go through everything. Maybe we just need to touch on the ones that
The ones where we meant to
had
come
some-
back to and.
Yeah,
Yeah. Do you remember which ones those were that we could?
I have notes on everything, so I think
Okay.
I do. You're good at this, Maggie. You're just gonna have to keep me honest. I'm gonna give you a second draft, and I'm probably gonna say, you know, these 6 are the ones that I think you had some contentious on, or I needed more research. And if I forget one, you need to hold me, remember.
I'm gonna start throwing heavy objects if you
Okay.
miss anything. So
Good. I think that'll be an incentive.
that'll work.
I'm not sure that will help the Swiss cheese memory if I get hit in the head with any of those heavy objects, but.
Concussion?
Yeah, well, that's bad news. So I will
Should
bring
wear
back
a
to you.
helmet.
I will bring back to you a second draft. So municipal planning grants. This, as I sent you, did I send you all a 1-page or 2-page sort of description of proposed?
I don't know if you said it.
What's
I
it?
think it was in the
It
packet.
looks like this.
I don't think it was in the packet.
Was it not in the packet?
No, it might have been a separate.
I don't think it was
Yeah.
in my packet.
Okay, maybe it
But
was
I'm
not in the
not-
packet. So there are
There's
some
some
on the
up there.
table there.
Watch 'em.
Let me just explain.
Yeah.
Municipal planning grant. It's a state grant. It's offered every year to all municipalities. It's really the only state money that we can get for planning purposes. So, if I get to get up on my soapbox for just a moment, thanks a lot, state of Vermont, for valuing planning, because, you don't. Because we don't get an allocation from the state annually. We have to compete for one, and this is it. And it's $450,000 for all 251 municipalities. And the maximum grant amount is 20,000. So it's a very small pot of money, and it's very competitive. Anyways, it's available each year. The deadline for submission for this year is on Monday. Normally, I talked to you about this a little earlier. Sorry about that. So I went to the select board a couple days ago and pitched 2 ideas to them. One for this grant. Both of them involve money to basically bring a consultant in to give us some additional horsepower to do a project that's important to the town. So one of them relates to your village growth area rezoning. And we've talked about wanting to have better design standards, both for sites and for buildings and green spaces. And Jeff and I were gonna work with the village steering committee on that. We haven't done it yet. So one of my ideas was, well, let's hire a consultant to help guide that. And probably wouldn't cost a lot of money, and then we could jumpstart that process, probably get it done, first part of 2018. Seems like it's an ongoing project. Why not bring some additional resources to bear? The other idea is something that the select board has been pushing that also has stalled, and that is to take a look at our water and wastewater allocation policies and try to improve them and use them to incentivize the kind of growth we want to see, and also do a better job of running the numbers to understand, based on what the projected costs are for updating the wastewater treatment facility and drilling new wells and bring them online, what do we need to be charging for fees for new development to recoup those costs? And how much new development would we likely see if suddenly we had the infrastructure we needed? Would we see enough development on an annual basis to pay back whatever bonds we're gonna have to take to upgrade these systems? We haven't done those analyses yet, and I think we're not going to do them without help. I don't think we have the tools or the resources in-house to do that, some of the economic analysis. So my proposal was, let's hire some consultants to do that financial and build-out analysis and help us work on an allocation system, maybe like Williston's, probably a simpler version of their growth management system. In any case, I pitched these both to the select board. It was unanimous. They all said that water thing is our absolute top priority as a town right now. That's what we're going to apply for the grant for. So unless you strongly disagree, they've already signed the resolution. That's what they want us to make the application for.
And that's
Can
what
we
you're gonna spend the
expand
next 2 days doing.
Our sewer?
Yes. What's that?
Can we
Yeah.
expand our sewer? If we throw money at it?
No, you
Yes.
don't.
Yes. The engineering that we did said that there are options to expand the sewer. It's just how much money,
Yeah.
how much
I
money.
didn't know, I mean, there was a rumor that you couldn't put any more in the river. and
Yeah,
all
and
that,
I think that was settled, although, to be honest with you, the report that Aldrich and Elliott, which was the firm we hired to do the study, Andrea Morganti kept asking that question. I don't know that she ever got a direct answer.
Cause it's a mute if you can't.
Right.
Right.
But we are currently
there's different
in the
levels.
permitting process for our existing wastewater treatment facility with the state, because our permits expired. All of the wastewater treatment facilities in the Champlain Valley have expired permits, and the state's been waiting to reissue them until the cleanup plan got finalized. Now that that's finalized, we're one of the first wastewater treatment plants to get a new permit for the next 5 or 10 years. So that's all being discussed with the state. My impression from those discussions so far is that yes, we can. It's a matter of money and what level of treatment we're willing to bring our current plant up to.
So first we're gonna find out how much it costs and
Right.
how many houses you need to pay
And
for
how
it.
much,
Exactly.
or
How
how
much
much
Or
you can
businesses.
expand it. You don't really know that either, right?
No,
It's not unlimited, I don't think.
No.
Alex.
The engineering report talked about 3 different
Right,
options, and
right.
the upper level option is quite a lot of
Is it?
additional
I haven't seen
capacity.
that.
But that report wasn't quite accurate, right? We don't have to take out as much.
Yeah, the nitrogen,
Is
to
the
get down into
thaw-
the weeds, the phosphorus versus nitrogen removal, we were under the impression that, that nitrogen was gonna be a new requirement under the state permit, and that would be an additional upgrade. Apparently in discussions
They're
in the
not
state
gonna-
permitting process, they're saying you're gonna be in a monitoring situation for nitrogen, not do the
treatment.
upgrade now.
Right.
We might have to do it though,
I
depending on
think
what the
it'd be a
monitoring
great
shows.
project, cause then we can finally have some answers.
Right, I know you've been asking that for a long time.
I think
It's like,
everybody
how do
has.
we make the, how do
Then
we
we
redo
know
the
what we
zoning?
can do and can't do.
Yep.
Well, if you were all amenable to that, that's what the select board is gonna apply for anyway. I
Did
do
they
need your
all-
signature on the resolution form, so we do need to talk about it, but,
Did they all 5
oh yeah,
Yeah.
Yep.
support it?
absolutely.
Andrea
Yep.
also?
Andrea, all the way down to Tom and everyone in between.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
They did say that they felt that the village design area standards was a good project to spend money on, and so,
But you don't need it if you don't have sewer.
well, Andrea suggested another grant
source.
funding source that we could maybe apply for, so I'm gonna look into that and.
Because we've talked about, this group has talked about, and the town too, illustrations, developing, graphic material that gets built into this. We've talked about doing form-based zoning in some beginning way to control the village area would be a good place to start. So there's a bunch of things that we've talked about that relate to that village area design standards.
Yeah, the ambitions that that we've been working on or talking about working on for that are far less than all of those things.
Right.
But I think that some of the ideas that you talk about are things that we can try to work into that. I like the whole illustrative part of a regulation rather than having it be purely words. I'm a little more leery about doing a form-based codes light version, cause I think
weren't-
we've gotten input that that's a difficult thing to do.
I know, I
Um,
sat at the meeting and the gentleman who made the presentation, who has done it, told us how many millions of dollars it would cost
Right,
for us to hire him.
yeah.
Some of us said, no, well, maybe there's a way that it can be done that, doesn't require the expert from out of town.
Well, in any case, we are gonna work on that.
Yeah.
It's just that, we can only apply for one of these. I didn't clarify that. The planning grant process says towns can only get one grant for one project per year, so, so we're gonna apply for the wastewater one. That doesn't mean we aren't gonna continue to try to work
Yeah.
on village area design.
Yeah.
And if we can bring some more funding to bear, maybe we can hire someone to help us. Or if the water and wastewater, project doesn't require the full grant amount and the full local match, we may have a little left over in our
can you do
in our
that?
town pot of money, not from the grant dollars,
not
but
from
our
the
town
grant
pot of
dollars.
money. We have $6,000 in our special projects line item this year for planning projects, and that dollar amount was set because that if you get the maximum municipal planning grant of 20,000, you need 6,000 in local match. If we don't need to use all that for the wastewater thing, then some of that 6,000 will be available
Doesn't
for,
Have to be used for
doesn't
the
have to be
local
used for
match.
local match. So that would be available to
So
maybe,
some part of a 6,000.
we'll see. I think the grant that we're gonna apply for is gonna be for the max, cause I think between getting an allocation policy designed, doing the economic analysis and the build out, I think that's gonna require a fair amount of consultant horsepower and will eat up the whole thing, but we'll see,
26,000.
yeah. So are you all, it sounds like you're all okay with
All
that
good.
as a planning grant? Excellent.
All right, onward to the minutes. Find them.
I didn't see anything in the minutes.
Anyone have anything?
Nope.
Does anyone have a motion?
Make a motion that we accept the minutes.
There you have it.
All those in favor?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Or, as Dennis would like it, anyone who doesn't want to be.
Doesn't, can we have the no votes
The
first?
no votes first. Okay, and then other business, and I know Barbie mentioned you had something.
I'd mentioned this a while back. The community dinners that happen at the United Church once a month. I spoke with Phil Pouch, and he was going to see if he could corral the select board into joining us to do a dinner there sometime in 2018. And it would be a matter of just preparing the food, and we do have a group of people who would help serve and clean up and, that sort of thing. So I'm hoping that this is something we could do, because it's a great way to get ourselves out in the community and
Good idea.
be seen. The months that are available are January, February, March, April, and I think next September. I don't know if, and I know the select board is probably busy January and February, but maybe March or April.
Yeah. Sounds good.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
It'll be fun.
Could I say something additional?
Sure.
Something different? On the way here tonight, I was listening to the radio, Vermont edition. It was a replay of today's daytime show, and it was all about mobile homes. Loaded with information about how mobile homes are built, how they're financed, how they're put on the ground, how mobile home parks are developed. And it wasn't Jane Lindholm, it was a man, I don't remember his name, speaking to someone who is involved in, at some state agency in mobile home control and work, and, you know, it's kind of like, parallel to the affordable housing effort that the state makes, and definitely linked. And I think it's great, just listen to it sometime. It's just loaded with information.
And the best way to listen to those once they've already happened
Do a
is
podcast.
either a
yeah.
podcast or from the NPR or VPR website, right?
Yeah, right,
Yeah.
right, exactly. I mean, they're easy to get to, and it's an hour-long show, and I'm not sure whether he was spending the entire hour doing just that subject. Sometimes there are other things. But what I heard was just like, wow, that's great information.
I think
So-
they may have done one the day before or the day before that on, or maybe it was just a story, I forget, on the St. George mobile home park and the fact that they are seeking to get the residents of that park to purchase it because it's up for sale.
Talked about those mechanisms.
Yeah,
I mean, it's just.
maybe
Is there
that was-
money out there to make these mobile homes more efficient and stuff? I mean, to insulate them better,
They-
put roofs on them.
They talked about all of those kind of issues,
I mean,
those questions.
A
People
mobile home
called in
uses
and-
more fuel than a regular house.
Yeah,
There's a program through Efficiency Vermont, actually.
There is?
Yeah.
Cause that's where they should go after. I
yeah.
mean,
There
they
wasn't-
use a
They've
lot
been
of
building
energy.
new mobile homes.
Lots.
Right.
It's actually being built, I think, in White River or Hartford.
Oh, yeah.
And they're basically net zero.
Right.
yeah. They
There's a whole
mentioned-
community
they
of them
mentioned
being
that.
placed just south of Virgins on Green Street.
Mm-hmm.
There was a talk at one time, years ago, of maybe having like 4 of those in one of our parks, but I guess it never.
It's too
Yeah.
bad
Came
they
to
couldn't go around and
fruition.
spray foam all the ones that
Yeah, that we
existing.
have.
I
and-
think people are starting to fix them up when the opportunity presents itself as best they can.
But the natural gas goes up there now, right?
I
Yes.
guess.
Yep.
Yep, goes all the way up.
I mean, that'll be,
But it's so expensive for them to change over yet.
I think that's a
Really?
detriment for them, yeah.
I thought they
yeah, but
had
they're
to
gonna,
have a
it's not gonna
basement.
take long for them to get their money back.
That's not
It
good.
has to be on a
Has to be on a
pad,
pad.
like a cement pad,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
A mobile home does.
No, the
No,
gas
the
tank,
gas.
now, the rules have changed.
Well, I think
So,
they've given you a little leeway on that.
they have, I think a year, but I think the end result is you're gonna have to have some sort of a pad, but I don't think that's a detriment to the
But
park.
the
I
natural
think it's-
gas, they don't have to have a tank.
No,
It's going
Oh,
right up by
that's
them.
right, that's right.
No, it's just.
Right? I
Still
mean, they
hooked
just have
up,
to
I
change your
don't know.
furnace over.
Is that what it is?
It's
And
expensive.
But they'll get, I heard people that are on natural gas, it's like phenomenal.
they're very,
How much they
I
save.
know that at the
Compared to
restaurant,
fuel
they
oil.
talk about what a
Unbelievable.
huge savings over here at Papa Nick's for them,
Until they get hit with.
The other thing I just wanted
Hidden
to
fees.
announce,
could
not
be,
for-
but right now, it's all looking good to them, it could
for
change.
consideration, there's a conference, Monday and Tuesday in town. You sent out a notice about it, the Rev 2017,
I
the
did?
REV,
Okay.
some time ago, but I've heard about it other places too. And it's about energy, there are workshops, Chuck's company is gonna be there, the guys from Energy Futures Group are gonna be there, so there's a lot of vendors, there's a lot of workshops. It goes through both days. It's $90, but if you are on a planning commission or no one in the town has submitted, you can ask for a stipend that'll cut that to $30. So I'm gonna go for both days, and I'll be able to talk about something when
Is that
that's
in
over.
Energies, in Hinesburg, you said?
No,
Oh,
it's at the
at you-
Sheridan, it's
okay.
at the Sheridan in Burlington. And I'm actually gonna take the bus in and out.
Oh, nice.
Alex, do you have any other?
Just what I emailed you all today, some of you probably haven't seen it yet, got an official notice from St. George that they are updating their town plan and are having a hearing on October 26th. For those of you that haven't seen your email, just check that, their draft plan is in the email. We're an abutting municipality, so they have to notify us. No action is necessary, but you are hereby notified. If you're interested, take a look at the plan.
Looked at it real quick, it looked pretty good for a small little town.
Yeah, clearly they got a consultant in to help them with that one.
Yeah.
65 pages, but
Is
it's
that
got
all
a-
it was?
It's
I didn't
65
get that.
pages, and it's pretty compact, but it hits a lot of points.
Yep.
And there's no large pig farms or waste disposal areas butting up against Hinesburg.
So we're okay.
I think, yeah, right.
There was a whole plan for the assault on Hinesburg.
From all,
Hence the wall.
all sides,
Just saying.
right.
Given that we
So-
provide their police and fire protection, they better be careful
They better
about how
be
they
nice
assault
to
Hinesburg.
us.
That's all I had, Maggie.
All right. Well, thanks, everybody.
All right.
Let's close this. Thank you.
Are we adjourned?
We are adjourned.
Okay.